I endured years of humiliation as the backbone of the family, but the day they announced at dinner that I had to sell the ancestral house to cover family expenses, they stabbed me in the back by trying to put the deed in a stranger's name. I watched them smile like vultures and pretend it was for the good of the household. I let them. Secretly, I had been doing the opposite of giving everything away. I had been quietly building a legal and financial shield, trusts, recorded deeds, a majority share in the family LLC. They thought my prayers and soft answers were acceptance. They were wrong. I was collecting evidence and ironcladding my future. My name is Maya Bennett, and I am 42 years old. Before I reveal exactly how I walked away with everything, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Hit like and subscribe if you believe toxic people always get what they deserve. But to understand how they ended up with absolutely nothing, we have to go back to the long, slow days where I learned to be invisible for survival. People like to call me the backbone, as if being strong meant I had no fractures. My husband Marcus called my cooking homey while posting his expensive lunches on social media. My mother-in-law Yvonne called me soft when I declined another fundraiser she wanted me to front. My sister Nia would flash a new designer purse and say, "You always make do with what you have, May." Even my children took for granted that I was the one who remembered every birthday, jury duty date, mortgage payment, and school meeting. I held us together, and people treated that holding as a given. I grew up on stories of our family land, how my grandmother Rosa bought that plot with a life of laundry and church offerings. The house smelled like Sunday rice and ozone from the old fan. It absorbed laughter and spats and tucked every secret in its floorboards. When my grandmother died, the property passed down to the family in conversations, but in reality, it needed protection. I watched relatives come and go, making promises and leaving with a legible "I owe us." So I did what a woman who loved deeply and feared the future would do. I became quiet, and I learned the language of ledgers. During the day, I wore the uniform of sacrifice, church hat perched, casserole dish in hand, soft amen, ready for the sermon. At night, while they slept or scrolled, I opened a different laptop, the one that had spreadsheets instead of scripture, legal forms instead of lyrics. I taught myself how to set up a limited liability company, how to transition property into a trust, how to be listed as the managing member without drawing attention. I kept my bank statements separate, names carefully filed, power of attorney documents drafted but not yet executed. I prayed for wisdom and I prayed for patience. Both prayers were acts of strategy. No one noticed because people are trained to see the loud, the branded, the Instagram ready. Marcus wore cufflinks that cost more than my monthly stationery supply. Yvonne hosted fundraisers where the champagne flowed and no one verified the invoices. Nia called herself an entrepreneur but borrowed from family lines of credit when her cash flow hiccuped. They saw rent checks, not receipts. They saw my hospitality, not the math hidden in the margins. "Wear your hair like that," Yvonne said one evening, riffling through a magazine as she criticized my simple dress. "You should try the Botox like Aunt Lillian. I mean, we must keep up." She sipped her wine and watched me nod. And I nodded. Over and over. I learned to accept their little humiliations as currency for peace. That was my practice. Be kind, be calm, be maternal. And in return, I would get a roof, some thanks, and more plates to wash. But the gratitude never came. Instead, entitlement did. They mistook my silence for weakness. They believed because I wasn't dramatic, I was powerless. That misunderstanding was their greatest mistake. It began with a whisper that smelled like varnish and desperation. Marcus had been slipping. I noticed unpaid notices paired with photos of him at a country club brunch. Yvonne's car payments were late, but she still wore gold. Nia's voice grew slicker every time she mentioned a quick flip or a can't-lose investment. Their debts were ghosts that smiled politely and refused to leave. One Thursday night, A night the sky felt low and humid, Marcus called a family meeting. It was staged like a celebration. We were to toast the Bennett name, and he would unveil his plan to settle family finances. He spoke with the charm of a man who believed his own flattering press. He casually suggested they put the house on the market and use the money to clear all the liabilities and start fresh. Yvonne clapped and fanned herself. Nia bit her lip like it was a winning poker face. I felt the room tilt. My throat closed. Not from surprise, but recognition. I had heard this language before in executives' contracts and predatory loan offers. To them, it was an elegant fix. To me, it read like a trap. They had a plan that smelled of entitlement. First, force a sale of the house. Second, use the funds to cover their debts, and then pocket the remainder. Third, move in Marcus's alleged associate, a younger woman named Tasha who had been appearing in Marcus's social media pictures with more frequency. They assumed once the house was gone, I would have nowhere to land. They assumed my faith and my soft voice would fold under financial pressure. They assumed that because I had built my quiet foundation in secret, there was nothing to fight with. I don't want drama, I told them. This is the Bennett house. It was my grandmother's. We should consider all options. Options? Marcus laughed, a slick, thin sound. The option is to sell and to get out of debt. Simple as that. Maya, you always complicate things. Why can't you be realistic for once? Yvonne chimed in. It's just sensible. We've all sacrificed. Except you haven't, I thought, but I didn't say it out loud. Instead, I allowed them to continue, to make each case with the casual cruelty of people who have practiced rationalizing theft. They believed that because I talked about prayer and forgiveness, I would never fight back. They could not see the ledger in my lap, the notarized documents waiting to be recorded, the escrow accounts I had quietly opened. But on that night, emboldened and drunk on their imagined win, they took the next step. They asked me to sign a preliminary transfer document as a formality to make the sale process smoother. They expected me to smile and sign like always. Instead, I excused myself to the bathroom and dialed my lawyer. Calm does not mean empty. I had cultivated stillness and used it as camouflage. When I left the table, the kitchen light hummed above the sink and the floor still smelled faintly of Marcus's grilling. In the bathroom, I breathed slow and called Desmond Clark, a lawyer I had met months before at a community meeting, someone I had hired under the pretense of estate planning but who had become my quiet ally. You don't need to sign anything tonight, he said, his voice steady. Tell me everything. I spoke in the hush of the bathroom, the plan they had announced, the way Marcus had smiled when he said he had friends willing to buy. I told him about Tasha, the social media posts, the invoice messages I had intercepted. Desmond listened and then explained what I already suspected. Once the family set the wheels in motion, they'd file for a quitclaim to expedite the transaction. Once recorded, that quitclaim would make their narrative look legal to most banks and buyers. We mapped a different route in the dim light of my phone. I would stop them legally before they could even make their petty signatures meaningful. That night at 2 a.m., I opened the trust documents I had been drafting for years and made them irrevocable. I transferred the house into the Bennett Family Trust, and I, Maya Bennett, became the trustee and the majority beneficiary for the express purpose of preserving generational assets. I recorded a protective deed, established an LLC where the property would be the core asset, and put a restrictive covenant on the title that required unanimous consent among the beneficiaries to sell. It was tedious work, typing, signing, notarizing, contacting banks. Each action was whispered like prayer. I sat with my hands cramping and my eyes dry. My heart kept time with a discipline that had been taught by hard mornings. When Desmond said we needed a paper trail of attempted coercion, I sat at the dining table and printed the email threads where Marcus discussed the sale, the screen recordings of Yvonne's flippant, "we'll take care of it" messages. and the text where Nia suggested using a hustle to move it fast. We also did something more public. I initiated an internal audit of the family's finances through an independent CPA firm I retained under the cover of tax planning. They began combing bank statements tagged to family accounts, and in a month, they returned a report showing a pattern of misapplied funds linked to Marcus's credit card charges and Yvonne's charity invoices. I sat on the results like bread in a basket, warm and heavy, but I didn't tell the family. Instead, I had the CPA prepare redacted reports formatted for court submission, but the crucial move was subtler. I set up an asset protection structure that required a 2-week notice and a beneficiary meeting before any sale could be executed. I recorded a lien release policy on the trust in case of fraud. I also discreetly made certain that any buyer would need to clear a title search that would reveal the protective trust, effectively scaring off any casual buyer. The real trap came from psychological restraint. I did not confront them. I did not flail. I continued to set the table, to pour wine, to smile when asked. They needed me to be predictable. Their greed required my compliance. The more I performed the obedient wife, the more they dropped their guard. They started to talk in front of me, forgetting that I had just spent nights turning their confidence into evidence. At the end of this stage, we had everything we needed: recorded trusts, contouring covenants, a CPA report, and a case file ready to show the court just how fraudulent their plan would have been. I also had something else: silence. There is a power in quiet when people expect noise. The event was Marcus's milestone birthday, an elaborate affair rented at a country club with crystal chandeliers, live jazz, and a guest list that read like a who's who of people who like to look successful. Marcus wanted to show off. He wanted validation. That night, the house was full of laughter too loud to be sincere, and I wore a dress that didn't hide my shoulders the way I had been taught it should. I wore it because it belonged to me and because it fit like truth. I arrived with a sealed black folder and a small envelope that held 3 court-ready copies of the audit report. I did not look like a woman preparing to dismantle lives. I looked comfortable, radiant, and entirely in control of my lipstick. People misread softness for permission. Tonight, they would learn the opposite. As the band slowed and Marcus took the microphone to thank everyone for their support, I stood. There is a certain hush when the room knows you will speak. A refined, anticipatory quiet that is palpable. Marcus smiled at me, the smile of a man who had rehearsed being charming. He raised a glass to family, and his voice was syrup over a snake. "Marcus," I said, stepping forward, my voice steady enough to cut glass. The room turned. "Thank you for tonight." He beamed. "To my wife, who keeps us?" "Don't," I interrupted softly. It was the smallest reprimand, and it landed like a stone. He blinked. People tittered uneasily, and I continued. "You have been telling this room that we should sell the house to pay off debts," I said, placing the black folder on the table as if it were nothing. "You've been asking me to sign as a formality to make the sale move faster. You've spoken to friends about buying it. You've mentioned moving someone in while we sort things out." Marcus's laugh tried to return. "Maya, you worry too much? You told Yvonne it would be quick money. Nia, you texted about splitting the proceeds." I turned. Each name hit them like the press of a hand. "You were wrong, and your plan would have been fraudulent." The band shuddered to a stop. I reached into the envelope and withdrew the CPA reports. I unfolded them like scripture. I did not scream. I did not cry. I let the evidence speak. That was the coldest kind of sermon. Desmond stepped forward and announced, "The Bennett Family Trust, which contains the property you wish to sell, is irrevocable and requires unanimous beneficiary consent. Any attempted transfer or sale is recorded and will not clear title due to a restrictive covenant and active lien we will file should anyone attempt fraud." Nia's face, always photogenic, went pale as a pledge card. Yvonne's hands trembled around her champagne flute. Marcus's eyes found a direction and then had nowhere to rest. I had a second, dramatic move prepared. The audit results. I placed the redacted CPA report on the table, letting the numbers and dates speak. There were charges to Marcus's accounts that were reimbursed through family accounts with no receipts, offshore transfers disguised as consulting, and invoices for events where no events had occurred. The air felt like a church with the organ on low. People began to whisper about audits and tax implications. The room's posture shifted from celebration to crisis. Because of these findings, Desmond continued, we will be filing a motion for temporary asset freeze pending further review. Moreover, we've issued a notice to any potential buyers that the title will not clear until the trust can verify authorization signed by all beneficiaries. Marcus tried to laugh it off, then yelled, "You can't do that!" like a man used to doors opening when he pressed the right button. "I already did," I said. 2 weeks ago. The documents are recorded. Every attempt to transfer will trigger notifications to the county recorder, the bank, and the title company. The humiliation was exquisite, slow, and public. Marcus's allies, those who wanted his cocktail level of grace without the responsibility, began to slink away. Yvonne grasped my hand and whispered through tears, "May, we didn't mean." But the linchpin move was the final one. I stood and slid another paper across the table, a signed, notarized eviction notice for any non-owner occupants that might be introduced in the event of a temporary move. It was styled as legal paperwork, calm and clinical. For all the glamour in the room, we had the law in our pocket. That contrast turned the party into a courtroom and us into witnesses. It was the ultimate checkmate. They had thought they could outpace me with charm and companions. They had misread my prayerful face as a cover for compliance. In truth, I had been patient, precise, and poised. I had given them an entire season to show themselves. They had obliged, and they folded under the weight of their own decisions. They begged in corners and pleaded in front of cameras. Marcus sent messages at dawn asking if we could talk it out. Yvonne left voicemails that sounded like the old woman who once taught me how to sew hems straight. Nia knocked on my door and said, "I thought you'd help me, May. I thought family." The difference now was the ledger. The difference now was my knowledge that forgiveness does not erase accountability. I listened to their excuses like one reads advertisements for things they will not buy. I had no interest in giving them a second chance to practice their craft. "You have to understand," Marcus said on the phone, voice small. "You don't have to do this." He still tried to make it about me. He had not learned how to be wrong without making it my burden. I told him, "You made your choices. You chose entitlement over stewardship. You thought I was a fund. I am not. The house was never just a house. It is a marker for our people." Yvonne came to my porch with a blanket around her shoulders and asked for mercy. Her eyes were the color of burnt sugar, sticky and cloying. I told her, "I have compassion. I also have boundaries. There are consequences to choices." Nia cried on the stoop like it was a TV plot. She asked me to come to the family table again to be the healer. My answer was gentle and direct. "You will heal," I told her. "But not with me as your safety net this time." There were lawyers and papers after the party, a flurry of motions and phone calls. Marcus hired an attorney who smelled of expensive cologne and cheap rhetoric. But the facts were already on record. You can't argue recorded deeds and notarized irrevocable trusts with charm. The county recorder's stamp does not listen to begging. I did not gloat in public. I left the town the week after the party. I drove across a state line early on a Monday with one suitcase and my grandmother's prayer book tucked under my arm. I took the deed to a coast where the ocean sounds like prayer and the people move in rhythms that remind you of breath. I bought a small house with wide windows and planted a herb garden. I started a small trust fund scholarship in my grandmother's name for girls who needed a place to learn estate literacy and financial independence. I did this because winning is never just about losing the enemy. It is about creating space for others to not make the same mistakes. Inside me, the change was not only legal. My nightly calendars no longer had evidence gathering scribbled in tiny lines. My prayer life changed from petitions to gratitude. I still cook for my children when they visit, but now I set boundaries about what I will cover. I have a therapist because spiritual healing sometimes needs clinical company, and I have friends who celebrate the restful punctuation marks of my life. I do not tell this story to crush anyone's joy. I tell it because there is a kind of excellence in protecting what your grandmother bought with decades of work. There is a kind of holiness in saying no to theft disguised as need. My revenge was legal, restrained, and impeccably classy. It did not come from fury, but from a long, patient cultivation of self-respect. When people ask if it hurt to turn my back on those I loved, I do not pretend it did not. Love and betrayal can sit in the same room with you and sip the same tea. The difference is that love nurtures, entitlement consumes. I chose to protect legacy. I chose to protect peace. I chose myself. If I could leave you with one scene from the aftermath, it would be me at sunrise on my new porch, the tide laying out a silver path, my prayer book in my lap, and my phone filled with messages from women who said, "I had a house like yours, and I needed to hear this." That is the reward. To know my silence was never weakness, but a stewardship of my dignity. So when you see someone who seems too soft, too sweet, too patient, remember that patience can be a strategy. Remember that spiritual healing and Black excellence can be armor. They will mistake your mercy for permission to plunder. They will forget that grace can also be governance. If you liked this story, tell me where you're watching from in the comments. If you need help seeing the fine print in your own life, reach out, ask questions. This is not just a story of revenge. It is a checklist, an invitation to protect what is yours with wisdom and determination.